So this episode's going to be a little different than the most of ones we've done so far. We're going to start kind of filtering in some new kind of episodes occasionally, and maybe take some deeper dives on specific topics, or kind of expand things a little bit, or maybe have some new, maybe more structured and focused conversations on specific topics, ideas, or, maybe it's something we've mentioned in conversation before, and we're just kind of going to drill down a little more. But, we're still going to do our typical episodes, the interviews, or whether it's Tony and I just hanging out, kind of rehashing, the past couple weeks events, or whatever it is. We're still going to be doing those. So we're just going to start doing something a little different too. And, the thought process I have here is to kind of maybe encourage someone else's curiosity, giving a little bit of information. This first one, it could be depending on, your leanings and whatnot. I tried to do my best of just kind of presenting some facts and how things work. That's going to be kind of the idea. We don't try to, at least on the surface, we don't try to encourage people to think one way or the other. It's all about thinking for yourself and, understanding the facts and getting information and making up your own mind. So this is just, it's kind of just a little different thing we want to try to do, and we'll see where it goes. So we hope that these curiosity with a course can challenge your curiosity, and maybe you'll learn something, or maybe make you a little more curious. But either way, hope you enjoy. Who decides what the law of the land is, what is and is not constitutional? Rather, what are the fundamental laws and guaranteed rights the citizens in the United States are ultimately ruled by? Marbury v. Madison, February 24th, 1803. Voted 4-0, this established that the judicial branch had the ability to strike down laws created by Congress that were found unconstitutional. The sanctity of life versus the choice of another. There are many variances of arguments for this same topic. Roe v. Wade, January 22nd, 1973. The 7-2 decision held that a woman's rights to an abortion was protected by the 14th Amendment. A man consisting of 7/8 white and 1/8 black ancestry boards a train car designated to whites only, loses his appeal that segregation is unconstitutional. Plessy v. Ferguson, May 18th, 1896. The lone dissenter in the 7-1 vote, John Marshall Harlan, argued the Constitution was colorblind. This continued to uphold the established separate but equal laws. Many pondered how we can be equal but separate. Brown v. Board of Education, May 17th, 1954. Voted unanimously 9-0. Decided, indeed, we cannot be separate and equal simultaneously. Who can decide who we love? More so, who we decide to enter into a legally binding relationship that is recognized by the government. Obergefell v. Hodges, June 26, 2015. Voted on 5-4, striking down some state laws that still held the ban on same-sex marriages. These, among many others, are some of the most well-known cases that have shaped our nation, as far as legality is concerned. As well may be what comes to mind when one mentions the Supreme Court. With the ability to declare law put forth by any collection of government officials to be constitutional or unconstitutional, Supreme seems to be a fitting title. And it's easy to understand, if you give it a bit of thought, why so much tension can be found historically around the Supreme Court and its justices. After all, this small group of individuals has the ability to change our very world we live in. While historically, one may agree or disagree with some of their rulings, they stand at present day just the same. In this episode, we'll explore in the simplest terms possible the struggle that manifests itself in the government and why it may be in our best interest, as frustrating as it may be, to understand how our world is being shaped around us, regardless if we decide to participate or not. To do this, we need to understand at least the basics of how our legal system, at least on a national level, finds its way along this path into the future. For many, including myself, waking up every day is the beginning of our adventure. The tasks ahead are built around survival, at least in the rudimentary sense. We need to sustain these bodies to propel us to the next day. We eat and drink. No one can survive long without the bare necessities of what this human vessel requires. Then it's shelter, taking care of our families, loved ones. In order to do this, we find a job, so we can obtain our small piece of the financial pie to pay for our needs. Often, this is a harrowing task in itself. Monday through Friday, we scrape by, just so we can scrape by. The weekend comes and we ask for a bit of a reprieve and find some enjoyment in hobbies or friends. Not often do we have the ability to stop and smell the roses, let alone consider the complications and convoluted storylines that continue to play out in the structure of our nation. So many are just rats in this racetrack, constructed by the powers that be. Now, apologies for the cliches, but I find them important in this connection. Many find comfort, often unbeknownst to them, in what they perceive as constants. But is anything in this world truly a constant? In come the ones that find themselves on the fringes. They get involved in these troubles when most people think to themselves, I just want to be left alone. Let me live my life. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, as it were. The Declaration of Independence, the unalienable rights to which it says have been given to all of us. Conversely, it seems to have been a struggle for many people to obtain these. As well, some believe without diligence it will be impossible to maintain. For there are vast populations across the world, and through time, that do not or have not enjoyed the freedoms we have today. Real quick, everybody, appreciate you joining us today. If you enjoy this or the main podcast, ask you to subscribe, like, give us your feedback. We appreciate the interaction. Also, visit chronic-curiosity.com and you can pick yourself up some fantastically curious merchandise. Thank you. So, how does all of this work? To be sure, our government and its workings are complicated, to put it lightly. Let's look at the basics of the structure, workings, and concerns of some of our forward-thinking voices. How does a law become a law? No, I won't start singing the I'm Just a Bill song from old school house rock, if you remember those. But that's where the journey starts. This next part can be a little dry, but stick with me as it's important to understand the full concept. Now, a bill or potential law or idea finds its way out of someone's head. Then it gets sponsored by a member of the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is a portion, along with the Senate, of Congress. Congress is essentially the name for the legislative branch of the government, not to be confused with the executive branch, think the president and his cabinet, or the judicial branch, aka the court systems. The House of Representatives have 435 voting members and 6 non-voting members, which are comprised of areas that aren't technically states, but still in essence are part of the United States, like Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, D.C., etc. We won't get into that now and attempt to alleviate some confusion, as if we haven't already introduced that. So these 435 members are voted in by the citizens of their respective states. Each state receives an appropriate number of members dependent on the population of their state they represent. This House of Representatives serves 2-year terms, which are elected on the even-numbered years. Now, when one of these ideas comes from one of these House members or their constituents, it receives consideration from a committee. If released by this committee, it then gets voted on by the entirety of the House of Representatives. Now, if this bill gets approved by a simple majority, that's 218 of the 435, which means at least one more vote for the bill than against it, it finds its way to the Senate. Now, the Senate, the other part of Congress, has 100 elected members, 2 from each of the 50 states. That serves a 6-year term. So you can see there's 2-year for the House, 4-year for a presidency, 6-year for the Senate. Once again, this bill is assigned to a committee. Then, if released, it is debated and voted on. Once again, a simple majority is required. So this time, 51 out of 100. Now, if you're a math-minded person like myself, you may say, well, there's an odd number of members in the House of Representatives, which, even if the House was partisanly split, which means in simple terms for our case, half Democratic and half Republican, it would be fairly easy to have a majority vote. But the Senate has an even 100 members. So if it's partisanly split, it'd be a stalemate, 50-50. So how do you have a tiebreaker? Well, that's when the current Vice President of the United States is given the tie-breaking vote. This is important. You have to remember this. Now, for sake of this scenario, we'll say our bill has been passed through the House of Representatives and the Senate. What now? The President of the United States has 10 days to sign. It becomes a law. If he vetoes this bill, it returns back to Congress. Remember, the House of Representatives and the Senate. At this point, the entirety of the Congress has the ability to override the president's veto. If our bill gets 2/3 vote collectively from the House and Senate. So, for this scenario, our bill gets passed to the House and the Senate and the presidency. The law is the law, right? This is when the Supreme Court is the last bastion of hope. Have we been nefarious in our bill creation? The Supreme Court has the final say on whether or not a law is constitutional. Now, there are a few clauses in this process, but that's the essential breakdown. So you can see how not only this can be confusing, particularly when you include the clauses, but how difficult it would be to pass bills that are perceived to be very one-sided, as far as our political parties are concerned. But what if one party held a majority in the House and the Senate, as well as the presidency? Since the early 90s, this has only happened 5 times, most recently under President Trump in his first 2 years in office, once for Obama, twice for George W. Bush, and once for Clinton. Carter, in the late 70s, had a unified government, as they call it, his entire 4-year term. Now, many would think that when a party has this much control, they would attempt to push through as many bills as possible to help their party in order to leverage their impact on legislation. Well, this is where we find ourselves in 2021, and where our fun speculation can begin, as well as where we find our fevered tensions in government today. While looking at just the numbers, there does seem to be a slight increase during these times of individual bills introduced and finding their way into laws, passed resolutions. Does that conclude what one could easily jump to? that these controlled government branches are passing legislation just to get their way? Does it mean more good or harm? Or is that just how the system has found its way? An inevitable ebb and I suppose that depends on where your political leanings lie. One thing can be said with some conviction, that politically speaking, the country seems to be more divided than can be remembered in recent history. One party seemingly taking a stance just to be the opposite of their counterparts across the aisle. Additionally, with these fires being fueled by a factor that has been little known before the past 10 years, and certainly not becoming a political or truly socially dividing tool until this time frame. Social media. Most notably, from the Democratic perspective, Trump using social media to whip up his followers into a frenzy with his online presence, never before seen from a president at this scale, whether it be his ability or lack thereof to sound presidential in his communications. There is quite a bit to unpack on what Donald Trump being the 45th president of the United States meant and still means for this country. But this episode is focusing on the mechanics and speculation of what those mechanics can do. So let's do just that. As a Republican concern at this time, Biden's introduced a committee to evaluate the Supreme Court, which arguably, even though the Supreme Court and any judges are to derive their rulings based on the law, at this time could be said is leaning conservative, with 6 out of the 9 judges appointed by Republican presidents. This was a major point of contention at the end of the 2021 presidential election. The Democrats claimed that the Republicans unjustly pushed through their nomination to fill an empty seat, one left by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, before the election took place, which notably the Democrats attempted to do in 2016, but did not succeed. Whether you agree or disagree with the tactics, we are where we are at this point. The new debate is if Biden is looking to pack the court, as they say. At this time, Democrats have proposed bringing the total number of Supreme Court justices to 13, which, once again, if you are a math person, you realize that, in theory, this would result in 7 Democratic appointed justices. Just happens to be one more than the sitting Republicans. Now, one could argue that their Democratic ideals would continue to further wise legislation that would help the country, if that's your leaning. Additionally, from the view of Republican ideals, this could be concerning. There is one final check to the balances of the United States government, with the House and the Senate being essentially democratically controlled, a Democratic president, and with propositions of packing the court, this could potentially lead to redefining how the Constitution is interpreted. Now, throughout history, I think most can agree that the interpretations of the Constitution have been, for the most part, beneficial for the citizens of the country. But with Biden recently saying, no amendment to the Constitution is absolute, it has left people asking exactly, what is that supposed to mean? Does that include the 13th, the abolishment of slavery? The 2nd, the right to bear arms? 15th or 19th, voting rights no matter your race or sex? The 25th, dealing with the succession of presidency? What about the 1st? Freedom of speech, press, assembly, religion, the right to petition your government. While most think we have nothing to be concerned about in the future, I ask you to contemplate humanity's history on its grand scale, and notably recently, as well as the current conditions of so many around the world that do not have the freedoms we enjoy. Our very short history in this country leaves questions as to how the rights of its citizens can be given for fair treatment, or taken away. So I know that was a very brief, um, you know, overlook of what the government is and different bills and how these things all get passed. I just that's the idea. Um, I don't want to. I want to put some ideas out there uh, to understand, so you can think about the processes and what this all means. You know, whatever your beliefs. I feel like if you've listened to our main podcast, talking to guests and to each other, and I hope that the idea that we give is, or at least the persona that we give is, just this open dialogue, just talking to people, just connecting with people, because that's all we got. We are in this together, and I've mentioned it a few times where my history with politics has been completely disengaged, and for years and years, I voted when I had turned 18. There was a presidential election that year, and I voted that year. But I didn't vote again until the most recent presidential election. And just to clarify and put it out there again for anybody who hasn't heard the discussion, I voted for neither presidential candidate. I wrote somebody in because I've found myself at a point where understanding what is going on in the United States politics and the entire system is just kind of, for the longest time, it left me at a position where I felt like I didn't matter. Nothing mattered because we couldn't change it. But then I slowly began to realize that if you don't try to change something, it absolutely will never change. So, in a sense, that's why Tony and I started this podcast, and my wife, Cassie, has been more than gracious and such a fantastic supporter, and she helps out. We do interviews, and she runs a lot of the behind the scenes stuff because she believes in it too. And it's just we've realized that just discussing with people and talking to people and bridging those gaps of, it doesn't matter what your beliefs are or what your political leanings are. It's realizing that we are all in this together. And just because you ignore something, like I ignored politics or whatever it was years ago, it doesn't mean it doesn't go away. So the idea for this episode was to encourage you, the listener, even if it's two of you, to maybe understand a little bit more of what's going on. And I don't want to be so presumptuous as saying that I'm educating anybody. That's not the idea. It's through this I educated myself, by such a great extent that I just feel like I have to pass it along to whoever finds it. So that's kind of the idea of the main podcast as well. If you've listened to it, is just, I'm a curious person, and I'm curious because I know I don't know a lot. I've said it a handful of times where, the more I learn, the more I learn that I don't know a lot. So, and that's all this is just trying to present some ideas where, I thought as I get into things that I don't know what this means. So I learn about what it means because I'm curious, and I just feel it's a waste for myself to learn it, and not try to pass it along when I have, some way of doing that. So, I won't say I hope you enjoyed the episode, but I maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But if you're still with me at this point, I just know that my intentions are. I just want to pass along my passion, and because I've had that along the way. That if someone passes their passion on, and I catch it, and it's just it's this great thing. So that's kind of the idea of what this will be. Is this curiosity with a course, a little more structured, a little more contained, maybe has a thread to it. But with this episode, it's just this idea of realizing that there are so many things working around us, and just because, like I said, if we ignore them, that doesn't mean they stop existing. So if we, if you want to be one of those people that complain about the government or this president or that president or, whatever it may be, this law, that law, maybe we need to get involved. Maybe we need to learn about it. Maybe we need to inject ourselves in it if we're going to complain about it. I guess that's where I found myself was years ago. I heard someone say, if you didn't vote, you don't have the right to complain. And I found some truth in that. If you're not involved with something, you can't complain about it. If you're not trying to actively fix it, then you don't deserve a voice. So I guess this is an encouragement as well to find your voice and to realize that these things are affecting us. So let's try to do something about it, and not in a malicious way in any form. I think it's important to sit down with folks like we do on Chronic Curiosity and have discussions and understand why people think different things, and just trying to connect, because you know what, we're not all going to be the same. It'd be silly if we were, but even the sillier thing is understanding that we are, just combating each other all the time for what? There's no reason. So if we can, as woo woo as it sounds, spread the love. It doesn't have to be love, but it's just me understanding that even if it comes down to, you know what, you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. That's better than fighting each other. So, and maybe through this whole thing, I'm just talking to myself. And I don't mean that by that no one's listening, but that I'm preaching to myself. It's been one of those things throughout my life that I've just trying to be a better person. So this is my way of doing that, is trying to connect to people. And I hope if you find some benefit out of this, I hope you reach out, talk, and, and considering that there's other people out there with different ideas, and maybe we should consider those ideas. Some of them may be stupid. Some of them may be really good. You never know until you consider them. But we have to have communication both ways, whether it be a person to person, in the government, whatever it might be. So, it really hits when you truly start understanding the history of the human race and the timeline, how it's not that big as we think it is. We talk about the histomap that we have on the show quite a bit, and realizing the United States has been around. It's barely an infant compared to the rest of these countries in the history of humanity and the amount of freedom that we have in the United States compared to other countries. So, we, at least my own thoughts is, maybe we should try to facilitate those things and continue to progress the idea of freedom in the United States, and instead of infighting. And obviously we all have our problems. The United States has its problems. I'm not saying it doesn't by any means, but if we can band together and look towards the future and try to build positively towards that, I think that's just so important. And I think to look towards the future, we have to understand our history. As cliche as it is, the only thing people learn from history is they don't learn from history, and history always repeats itself. And so I've kind of taken those things to heart, and in looking at what has gone on, what is going on, and applying it to where we're at in our location at this time. So it's so hard to put all these things into words, because that's not what I do. I just like to ask questions and get trapped in my own brain. I am not an articulate person by any means, but I hope this podcast does something for somebody. And if nothing else, you ask some questions and you think I'm ridiculously crazy, you don't know why, then I suggest you ask me, and I would love to sit down and talk, because that's the only way we're going to get through this. So, if you stayed with us this long, I really appreciate it. We will continue to do the normal Chronic Curiosity show. We have guests on. We have some really fantastic guests planned, and some fun shows I'm looking forward to. But we also have some, Curiosity with a Course shows planned as well, where, like I said, we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive, and whatever it be, it may still be a conversation with somebody, just a little more controlled than some of the other episodes. So that's the idea. But at the same time, I know we do have some advertisements in here and there, and it's our own advertisements, but we don't make any money off this show. But if you would like to support the show, I try to keep it as clean as possible. I don't have weird, Home Depot advertisements on the podcast or anything like that. Not saying that I wouldn't have advertisements on, but we just want to be true to being honest. And unless somebody comes along with, a company that we could feel like we could get behind for a reason, I just don't feel right doing it. But if you want to support the show, as on the little advertisement clips, you can go to chronic-curiosity.com and pick yourself up a t-shirt or whatever it is. If you have something that you'd like to see some Chronic Curiosity branding on, or some image, or some, fun, curious ideas, there's, to those shirts that we have, it's not just a shirt. It's a very comfortable shirt, but it's not just a shirt. It's, the ideas behind it, like I've talked about Schrodinger's cat and different things. There's ideas behind the ideas. So, different layers. And so if you'd like to support the show, that's the best way to do it. But other than that, I really appreciate everyone sticking around. And this was obviously fairly rough, because we don't do production type things. We don't do construction very well. But here we are. So we're just going to put it out there. We're going to see what happens, and maybe take some deeper dives into some additional items. So if you enjoyed this episode, please let us know. And see you next time. Bye.